So by now, you've probably heard about the fires burning down in Australia. There's an estimated 500 million animals that have died, and over 20 people, and thousands of homes have been burned to the ground. You've probably seen the articles and videos talking about the celebrities at the Golden Globes that lectured us on the reality of climate change and how action must be taken now. And of course, everybody's favorite child soldier, Greta Thunberg, has been tweeting out things like, "Not even catastrophes like these seem to bring any political action. How is this possible? Because we still fail to make the connection between the climate crisis and increased extreme weather events and nature disasters like the #Australia fires. That has to change." But it's not just the activists, it's the politicians. Two-time failed presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has tweeted out things like, "Australia's bushfire emergency, spurred by climate change, has killed 24 people, destroyed thousands of homes, and led to the loss of an estimated 500 million animals. Here are ways you can help." To a link I presume leads to a donation site for the Democratic Party, or one of their affiliates anyway. And even former President Barack Obama has tweeted out, "The catastrophic fires in Australia are the latest example of the very real and urgent consequences of climate change. It's on us to stay focused and protect the one planet we've got for the next generation." And you can see here, I want to point out this picture. You can see it looks like somebody's backyard with the fire burning in the background. And I've done a video on this previously, how climate alarmists have said they need to quit using pictures of the polar bear on the melting chunk of ice because it seems too distant and too remote, and they want to make it seem more immediate, more like it's happening to us right now, right here, well, in this picture, in our own backyards. And so this is one of the first articles I've seen that's taken that advice to heart. And it's just, who hasn't seen a backyard like this with the trampoline and the swing set? The only thing actually that it's missing is they're supposed to be using a picture of a sad person, like a crying person or a screaming person. So this propaganda isn't perfect yet, but just keep an eye on the pictures used in climate articles. It's very deliberate and very consciously chosen. So if we are to believe the mainstream liberal narrative, it goes something like this.
Ringing ears, blurred vision, the end approaches.
Now, as people are digging into it deeper, it's turning out that this is fake news. Paul Joseph Watson has done some really great work on this subject, and he's found that it appears that these fires have been caused by arson more than anything. There's been a total of 183 people arrested by police in Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, and Tasmania for lighting bushfires over the past few months. These figures were obtained by news agency AAP. In South Wales, 24 people were arrested for arson, risking prison sentences of up to 25 years. In Queensland, police concluded that 103 of the fires had been deliberately lit, with 98 people, 67 of them juveniles, having been identified as the culprits. Breitbart's Simon Kent reports, "The link between arsonists and the deadly fires that devastate Australia every summer is well known and well documented, with the rate of deliberately lit fires escalating rapidly during the school holiday period. Around 85% of the bushfires are caused by humans either deliberately or accidentally starting them, according to Dr. Paul Reed, co-director of the National Center for Research in Bushfire and Arson. He said, "About 85% are related to human activity, 13% confirmed arson, and 37% suspected arson. The remainder are usually due to reckless fire lighting or even just children playing with fire. School holidays are a prime time for firebugs, but especially over summer. Channel 7 News Sydney reported, police are now working on the premise arson is to blame for much of the devastation caused this bushfire season. Also, new environmental policies that restrict prescribed burning, where landowners burn off flammable ground cover in cooler months in a controlled manner so it doesn't contribute to bushfires, have also exacerbated the problem. But it's not just limited to Australia, where this alarmism springs up. Earlier in the year, we saw pictures like this. Photography lays bare reality of melting Greenland sea ice. And you can see this picture. These poor dogs are pulling this sled that's supposed to be used on the snow through, it looks like, the ocean. Apparently the water levels have gotten so high that there's no snow left in Greenland at all. Well, until it was later discovered, this is a yearly event that happens in Greenland that's known as summer. And sometimes it helps to look back through history at some of this, because this isn't a new phenomenon. The Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI.org, has put together a list of 50 years of failed eco-apocalyptic predictions. And some of these are pretty fun, so we'll go through these to get some context to this alarmism. So in 1967, you can see this headline, "Already Too Late. Dire Famine Forecasted by 75. That's 1975. Already too late for the world to avoid a long period of famine, a Stanford University biologist said Thursday. Paul Ehrlich said, "The time of famines is upon us and will be at its worst and most disastrous by 1975. He said the population of the United States is already too big, that birth control may have to be accomplished by making it involuntary and by putting sterilizing agents into staple foods and drinking water, and that the Roman Catholic Church should be pressured into going along with routine measures of population control." Here we have an article from 1969. Everyone will disappear in a cloud of blue steam by 1989. Why blue steam? Well, it doesn't really say, but this is from the New York Times, Sunday, August 10th, 1969, the paper of record. Foe of pollution sees lack of time. Palo Alto, California, August 5th. The trouble with almost all environmental problems, says Paul R. Ehrlich, well, that's the same guy as the last one, is that by the time we have enough evidence to convince people, you're dead. We must realize that unless we are extremely lucky, everybody will disappear in a cloud of blue steam in 20 years, the 37-year-old scientist said during a coffee break at his laboratory. The situation is going to get continuously worse unless we change our behavior. So, jumping up to 1970, the Boston Globe put out, on April 16th, scientist predicts a new ice age by 21st century. Says air pollution may obliterate the sun and cause a new ice age in the first third of the next century, if population growth continues. The demands for cooling water will boil dry the entire flow of rivers and streams of the continental United States. Wow. And that's because of the, hydroelectric power generation. I thought that was good for the environment. Here we have one, October 6, 1970, Redland's Daily Facts, also California. He says, the oceans will be as dead as Lake Erie in less than a decade, which would have been 1980. America will be subject to water rationing by 1974 and food rationing by 1980. Here we have in 1971, Washington Post staff writer, July 9th, U.S. scientist sees new ice age coming. Dr. S.I. Rasool of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and Columbia University says that in the next 50 years, the fine dust man constantly puts into the atmosphere by fossil fuel burning could screen out so much sunlight that the average temperature could drop by 6 degrees. Drop. If sustained over several years, 5 to 10 years, he estimated such a temperature decrease could be sufficient to trigger an ice age. Here in 1972, we see new ice age by 2070, Brown University, Department of Geological Sciences, written to the president. And he tells them there was a meeting, and he said the main conclusion of the meeting was that a deterioration of climate by order of magnitude larger than any hitherto experienced by civilized mankind is a very real possibility, and indeed may be due very soon. So these academics wrote the White House. The Guardian, January 29th, 1974. Space satellites show new ice age coming fast. So this whole global cooling thing was a real fear. Here you even have Time magazine, 1974, June 24th, 1974. Another ice age, they ask. And they tell us, telltale signs are everywhere, from the unexpected persistence and thickness of pack ice in the waters around Iceland to the southward migration of a warmth-loving creature like the armadillo from the Midwest. So apparently Iceland has a lot of ice, and the armadillos are moving southward. Time to panic. 1974, we have the ozone depletion, a great peril to life. Of course, the ozone hole has been shrinking. I guess people are using less hairspray since the end of the 80s. 1976, the cooling, the New York Times book review. So writes Stephen Schneider, a young climatologist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, reflecting the consensus of the climatological community. In 1974, Schneider tried to explain to a White House policy-making group why conditions are likely to worsen. One of the most depressing anecdotes in the book is Schneider's description of the deaf ear their warnings received. Oh, well, the White House didn't believe in global cooling back then? I think that worked out for the better. 1980. Acid rain kills life in lakes. But then 10 years later, the U.S. government formed a study on acid rain and concluded, acid rain, no environmental crisis, study concludes. On January 5th, 1978, the New York Times publishes No End in Sight to 30-year cooling trend in the Northern Hemisphere. 1988, James Hansen forecasts increased regional drought in the 90s, according to the Miami News. Our climate model simulations for the late 1980s and the 1990s indicate a tendency for an increase of heat wave drought situations in the southeast and Midwest United States. But that was the last dry year in the Midwest, and recent years have been record wet. Also in 1988, we have Washington, D.C. days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If you liked last summer's record temperatures, you're going to love the 1990s, says James Hansen, the NASA scientist, who during congressional hearings on the Midwestern drought linked greenhouse warming to the heat wave, and here it begins. Washington, D.C., for instance, would go from its current 35 days a year, over 90 degrees, to 85 days a year. And he said the level of the ocean will rise anywhere from 1 to 6 feet. The worst-case scenario between now and 2050. But the number of hot days in the D.C. area actually peaked in 1911 and have been declining ever since. 1988 also, in the Canberra Times, they said the Maldives will be completely underwater in 30 years, so right around now. A gradual rise in average sea level is threatening to completely cover this Indian Ocean nation of 11,096 small islands within the next 30 years, according to authorities. But the end of the Maldives and its 200,000 people could come sooner if drinking water supplies dry up by 1992, as predicted. In 1989, they published that rising seas would obliterate nations by the year 2000, and that's according to UN officials. A senior UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming trends is not reversed by the year 2000. In 1989, New York City West Side Highway will be underwater by 2019. He met a scientist named Jim Hansen, who in 1988 predicted the greenhouse effect before Congress. He went over to the window with him and looked at Broadway in New York City and said, "If what you're saying about greenhouse effect is true, is anything going to look different down there in 20 years? He looked for a while and was quiet, and then he explained, "The West Side Highway, which runs along the Hudson River, will be underwater. You'll have signs in restaurants saying, 'Water by request only.' Within 20 or 30 years, and remember we had this conversation in 1988 or 1989. And, of course, we're still able to get water at restaurants." In March of 2000, The Independent said, "Children won't know what snow is." In 2004, The Guardian said, "The Pentagon tells Bush climate change will destroy us." They said Britain will be Siberian in less than 20 years. So that would be by right now. Britain is plunged into a Siberian climate by 2020. Nuclear conflict, megadroughts, famine, and widespread rioting will erupt across the world. The only widespread rioting I see is opposing globalism. In the Argus Press, June 24th, 2008, they said a NASA scientist says, "We're toast." He says, echoing work by other scientists, he said that in 5 to 10 years, from 2008, the Arctic will be free of ice in the summer. So this is already supposed to have happened. And Representative Ed Markey, a Democrat, says, "Dr. Hansen was right. 20 years later, we recognize him as a climate prophet." I guess that's just because he's perpetually wrong. In 2008, Al Gore warns of an ice-free Arctic by 2013. Still there, however. In 2009, Prince Charles warned us we only have 96 months to save the world. Also in 2009, a UK Prime Minister says we have fewer than 50 days to save our planet from catastrophe. Some of these people even make AOC look smart. In 2013, it was again predicted we would have an ice-free Arctic in 2 years because of a methane catastrophe. In 2013, the U.S. Navy predicts a summer ice-free Arctic by 2016. 2014, a French foreign minister says we have 500 days to avoid climate chaos. And 500 days later, the planet is still standing. And let's not forget, in Glacier Park, they've had to remove the Gone by 2020 signs because, now it's 2020, and the glaciers are actually growing. So this climate stuff can be pretty tough. I think we really need to think about it logically. I think we need a Vulcan. So since our liberal friends seem to only take their scientific advice from celebrities, let's look at what a celebrity was saying back in 1978. Take it away, Leonard.
It is not only the lonely Arctic that has cooled. The whole northern hemisphere is growing steadily colder.
There is little doubt that someday the ice will return. At least 8 times in the past million years, it has advanced and retreated with clockwork regularity. If we are unprepared for the next advance, the result could be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history. What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought. During the lifetime of our grandchildren, Arctic cold and perpetual snow could turn most of the inhabitable portions of our planet into a polar desert.